yeah, get a little stick pop. Come on. All right. Mr. Parr's got an interesting song here, but we got 6 tables in, so we're going to start. Okay? 5 questions.
Is there any way you can move that to the side?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay.
I want to make sure you can see. There you go. Is that better, Katie? I wish you had. That sounds loud. Not a function of the integument. Yes, it doesn't, right? We said this is not really, we're talking about the stratified squamous, so we absolutely do want to see where it produces vitamin D, and we've seen where it protects you from UV light, so what layer is responsible for producing the epidermis? So all the cells that contribute to what we call epidermis come from this layer. The corneum is the outermost, and that's the dead stuff we're getting rid of. So we're really getting it from the base. Remember that base. It's the base, all right? All righty. Which of these describes that dermis? Thinking about what's in that dermis. So you got some models in front of you. Stephanie's not here today. Layer is mostly epithelium and avascular. No, that won't work, right? That's the epidermis, okay? This is the outermost layer of skin. No, that won't work, right? That's the epidermis, right? Contains adipose and is protective. That's not really describing it either. The best answer there is glands and hair follicles, right? So that last one is really more of the hypodermis. So, got to discriminate. Which does not contribute to skin color? So that lovely color that we have. Sorry, I gotta turn that down here. Oh, sorry. All right. Yeah, and so I totally see where the problems are. All right. So the amount of blood moving through the skin does. Right? So that's your perfusion of your skin. So when you have more blood moving through, you appear redder. And there's less. We're going to add this to controlling heat as well. But we do have to remember that's a contributing factor to color. All right? So, and that's due to the hemoglobin, of course, in the blood itself. All right? So, and we said too, if your blood doesn't have enough oxygen, you can see cyanosis, especially in lighter skinned people. All right? So the amount of melanin, yay, nobody said that. No, it's really disturbing. Yeah, right. There's our win, right? The amount of carrots in your diet, we kind of left off talking about that. That's a pigment that orange and yellow vegetation has. And yes, since it's the basis for vitamin A, it can deposit with the fats, because vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin, in the waxes and lipids in the skin. So the amount of keratin in your epidermis really doesn't, all right? Your keratin is there for protection, to prevent water loss, and hardening. So, last one. What feature is very evident on the palms and soles? So, think about your own palms and soles, maybe. And again, what I really appreciate about you guys is you do reason through. I know I can see disappointment when you get things wrong, but hold on to the reasoning. That's why I said I'll deal with the points that come from the cahoots. You think about the process that you are going through with your teammates. All right? And so, no, these are actually areas where we have less pigment, aren't they? So this is not. Now, hopefully you all grasp the fact that, okay, in the palms and soles we have that stratum lucidum that is unique, all right, which you might have hoped would have been one of the answers on this, right? And a much, much thicker stratum corneum, right? Those are both features of the palms and the soles, but that's not on here, right? So I do want you to know, yeah, and nobody said this, thank goodness, right? Hair follicles are absent, right? You don't tend to have that, and that's why you won't see sebaceous glands either, but you see plenty of sweat glands. You sweat a lot from your palms and your soles. The hypodermis, not really different here. Again, this is insulation and so forth. What is different is on your palms, because maybe you can't see your feet so well. See all those lovely ridges that you call fingerprints? That's your dermal papillae. Okay? So we said we've removed the epidermis here on this model to show you this. And it's there in other places in your skin as well, but on your palms and soles, it is really pronounced. And the reason is because this helps us with gripping. These again are the areas where we make contact. That's why we said the stratum lucidum is there, because it's an anti-shearing layer, so it kind of resists the shearing forces that would separate the skin. So lucidum's good for that. The dermal papillae are pronounced, right, areas where that dermis really comes up there, so much so it creates the ridges that you see on these surfaces, right? And that then is a factor again to help with the shearing as well as to help with gripping. So
the dermal papilla has to help with gripping?
Yeah. Yeah, so the epidermis is still sitting on top of this, right? But as you look at your slides in lab, do look for that. But that is exactly why you see these ridges here. That's actually that feature. Okay? Alrighty. So good job, you guys. And again, I know it's a learning process, but that's why we end up doing this. All right. So these accessories, right? So when we look at this skin model, right, I got a few things that are not explicitly, right, the idea of the epithelial epidermis, and not all this connective tissue that we either call the papillary, right, or again those dermal papillae, or the reticular layer, which is most of those. There's stuff thrown in there, right? And so this ends up being the glands, the hair follicles, and then of course the nails fall out in just certain areas of your integuments. But they're all additions, add-ons, right? So again, they are actually came from the epidermis is what I'm saying. But when you were developing as an embryo, your epidermis actually invaded your dermis. It grew down into it. Just like it looks like the dermis is trying to grow into the epidermis with its papillae, it actually, we call that invagination, just kind of moved on down in there. So these cells that you see that are part of the glands and part of the hair follicles, they're all, right, epithelial cells. And we realize that because secretion is a gland thing, and that's at the epithelium. All right, so what is it, what do we got here? Right? And you don't need to know a whole lot. Most people know about their hair and their nails. It's not really a big deal here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. So I'm just telling you just a little bit more information here, right? Everywhere but the palms, the soles, the lips, right? And we said that, right? No hair follicles, as we talked about, what's prominent on the palms and the soles. All right? So there are certain places it is missing on us, but otherwise everywhere because we're mammals. And we own being mammals. And I say that to my son, hey, leave that hair alone. You're a mammal, right? So it functions in sensory. So hair allows us to really get touch because it sticks out there a little bit more and it moves, right, when things come across it. So hair gives us a lot of sensory. It does protect us. It does maintain some temperature, right? Fur, feathers, and fat are the main ways that right, the endotherms keep their internal temperatures. Hair is a way to communicate. We humans as mammals don't use it as much as maybe other animals. If you've ever watched your, animal's hair stand on end, yeah, that's a communication.
Communication saying they're about to hurt.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It does grow in cycles. If you haven't considered this, right? I have this all in italics, which means I'm not going to ask you about the anagen, right, and the catagen, right? Those are just, and the telogen. So there's 3 stages. I'm just letting you know. That's not sometimes on my slides. I don't have to ask you everything I talked about in class, right? I'm just saying, yeah, if you haven't considered it. And this is why some falls out every day, because your hair is not synchronized, right? It'd be really fascinating if it was, wouldn't it? So for 2 to 7 years, your hair grew exactly, and you get it right, and then suddenly you wake up and it was all on the floor. All right, and then you start all over again. Right, and that's not the way it works. So it's really fascinating to think about this, because like your skin, and talking about you injure your skin, you're losing skin cells all the time. The same thing's happening with your hair. You're losing all the time, but yet it looks the same every day when you wake up and look in the mirror. So it's pretty cool to think about. The color in hair still comes from melanin, right? The melanocytes are in the papillae, so there's this little, right? Yes, that papillae always means a finger-like thing, so it's down here within the dermis, right? The papillae, that's where you get and the color just stays in the hair, all right? When you get gray hair, it breaks down sooner. That's why you see that, or they don't produce as much, and that's why you don't see color anymore, right? And again, like I said, the follicle, which is what is found within the scalp or within the dermis, right? If you think about hair on your head, but hair everywhere, that follicle is really these epidermal cells, right? And this is why when we talk about injury to the integument, if I lose my hair, if I burn down through the dermis, right, or injure through the dermis, and I lose these cells here, then my ability to replace my skin decreases, right? It becomes much, much less, because these are the sources of new cells. Because if I've done, if I've gone past that superficial burn where I lose my epidermis, okay, I've lost all the stratum of cells, so there's nobody there to replace skin. It's going to come from these guys, isn't it? Because these are my reservoirs right here. So if I've done so much damage that I lose, right, hair follicles, then I'm in trouble, right? Then I'm going to scar for sure. All right, so this cartoon shows this idea again. Most lab instructors don't ask you. We're asking you so much, and we only have one lab we do for integument. So I never ask my students what all do you find in the hair follicles on here. Our model is made so you could, but it's not valuable. But this kind of walks you through, and I did have a test question, I think a quiz question that says, which of the following would you find in the hair? So it does have, right, this papillae where there's a lot of blood, very actively growing area, and the melanin. It has these sheaths, so layers, right? They will have a sebaceous gland. Sebaceous glands are, right, associated with hair follicles, because the oily substance they make, right, these ones, because they're alveoli, they make gets secreted on the surface and creates this kind of coating to hair. All right? So sebaceous glands, these little exocrine glands, are going to be secreting, and it's going to be carried to the surface with the hair follicle. All right? The shaft, which will come through the surface of the epidermis and out here, is all dead, just like your stratum corneum is dead. And it still has these, right, outer structure, the cuticle, cortex, and then a medulla in it, but that's just, it is a complex structure. That's all I'm saying here. All right? Now, hairs have this smooth muscle called the erector pili, and that does, when it contracts, cause hairs to stand up. So for us, without as much hair as some of the other mammals have, what it creates is like goosebumps, an appearance of, right, goosebumps. So again, the sebaceous glands are really coating the hair and preventing water loss, and the erector pili are helping, because like all muscle, when it contracts, it generates heat. So that's why goosebumps when you're cold, shivering, that's going to be something we give to the erector pili. All right? So this, again, I don't see myself asking an extensive question about hair follicles, but this is really giving you what the book states and what they are, right? So again, the shaft that pushes out is dead. It's equivalent to that stratum corneum, right? The papillae is where we'd see the most active division going on and pushing up, right? So nails, kind of the same idea, just a few things to note about them. When we cut into the finger and look at this, we've got a few areas, that nail bed and nail body. Yeah, it's a kind of an unpleasant picture when you think about it, right? But here, of course, is our most distal phalange, right? So when we're looking at the fingers, right, the distal phalange, that last one here, it will start running in the bones, right? And the nails would pretty much almost cover that. This lunula, which means partial moon, that's that white area that appears there. The nail body is, again, dead, right? So what hurts when you cut into that is the fact that it's adhering to living cells and nervous tissue, Okay, but this is all dead, all right? This is really, it hurts because it's now sticking. When it sticks out, the edge of it, it's not, right, adherent to any living tissue. So, but all of this is technically, it's dead, right, just like your stratum corneum. So, again, the nail bed there is produced by, right, the stratum basale, so this is just continues with your skin. Yeah, Kim?
With the hair follicle, does the root of that follicle grow outward first whenever it's getting, when it's growing up? Because it looks like it was like white in the middle and it kind of went outward. Does it get older and become wider?
I believe that's more of it. It's less of that apositional growth like a phone and more of that direction, I think.
Gotcha.
But I'm not for sure on that. So, yeah, and again, that's just this idea that this is, again, a different type of keratin, just a slightly different in the molecule that leads it to be a little bit harder, okay? But it still really continues with you in part of your integument. All right, sweat glands and sebaceous glands specifically. Sweat glands come in two forms, all right? There's what we call these eccrine sweat glands, and then there's these apocrine. So when you look at your models, the eccrine kind of stand alone, and the apocrine are often associated with hair. I don't know if they specifically always have to be, but your models do show them associated. Now, just to let you know, both of these are actually merocrine glands. So both of these actually just undergo exocytosis. This one just got named wrong, all right? Because we didn't realize what was happening. But that's not here or there. You have to call them eccrine and apocrine, because that's their titles, right? That's a descriptor. So eccrine sweat gland, apocrine sweat gland. And the apocrines, again, they're making slightly different chemicals. Sweat, it's both classified as sweat, but this sweat has more organic materials in it, which include some pheromones. So we only find the apocrine ones, again, that are generally associated with hair, in really the axillary areas and the groin, the pubic area, right? We don't find them all over. These ones we find all over, right? In fact, the pores that you see in your skin, those are generally the openings to sweat glands. Okay? So, again, it's releases vesicles. So, we've got merocrine secretors, right? The main function, again, is producing water and waste, but cooling. Because the water that gets excreted, right, so it gets secreted in here and then it's delivered to the surface, so it's excretion, right? That water carries heat, right?
So it produces water?
Well, the water is coming from the body, right? When you sweat, the water's coming from fluids inside, that's why you have to drink to replace them. But that water is absorbing heat, because water has that high heat capacity. So that's why we can use sweat to cool. So it's pulling up, the blood comes circulating through here, right, carrying the heat, delivers it to the glands, right, it radiates or conducts to the glands. The glands, right, pick that up, right, their water absorbs it and releases it, okay? That's really how it works. In that secretion are some salts, which is why sweat is salty, right, some sodiums and chlorides, right? And some, like I said, some cellular waste, a little bit. It's not, I mean, our most efficient waste removal is the urinary and the digestive, okay? But, and then respiratory also does some waste removal, obviously, but there are some protective things. So sweat has, right, protective characteristics as well. Again, just to let you know, I'm not going to ask you about dermestidin, right? I'm just going to tell you that there are some ways to protect you because, right, you have a lot of bacteria and viruses that can live on your skin. All right, your apocrine, you're usually going to see them with hair follicles. Their secretions are more complicated in a sense. They include pheromones, which are ways that we communicate with others in our species and other organisms. So it creates this, again, smell, and they tend to become more active as we go through puberty and the rest of life. So again, places we don't find, right, they're not as common. We find the axilla, the nipples, the genitalia. That's where we find the apocrine. So this is your underarm, supposed axilla. All right, so that's kind of, and as you look at these today again, these would typically look more like sebaceous glands. They tend to have shorter ducts. The apocrine sweat glands, which don't really show up there, they're going to have a longer duct, and they're still going to be coiled, right? Like the sebaceous ones are called alveolar or alveolus. They look like grapes, and then the sweat glands are simple coiled glands. All right. So sebaceous glands. Again, your instructors will probably make you look at these slides of the skin to see these, because this is a fatty substance, and that's why the cell, pretty big cells, but they look pretty clear. That's their nucleus. The cytoplasm is pretty clear because it's fat, right? And fat doesn't stain well. That's what you saw with adipose tissue. So sebaceous glands are pretty easy to pick up. They are going to be near a hair follicle. So here, the way it's cut, you don't see all the parts of the hair follicle. So it's just because, these areas didn't, again, pick up stain, right, when they did the cut. But this is a hair follicle. These are the epidermal cells right down in here and in here. These are cells dying, right? In the center, moving towards the center, we see more dead in a hair follicle. So, but those sebaceous glands tend to be right around there. These are examples of sweat glands somewhere in the same area. Right, and then this is all that, right, irregular connective tissue you can see in between. Right, so these sebaceous glands, again, they're holocrine. Remember, they give everything when they get, and that's why when, it's easy to see why acne, which is based on a bacteria, thrive on this, because it's a lot of food. When you think about what a sebaceous gland is making, nice oily stuff, but a lot of food, it's a whole cell, right, it's a holocrine substance. All right. They're going to connect, like I said, they're much shorter ducts, so they have this kind of grape-like, what we call the alveolus appearance to them, right? So it's still an exocrine, right? So all these glands, and most glands we're going to talk about in AAP1, they're going to be exocrine, right? So again, whole cell, so it's a holocrine. That sebum also has antimicrobials, but that fights some microbes, and other microbes actually love it and eat it, right? And it helps prevent dehydration. So I offer you this because I had this question, posed to me by a home health person, and I was curious about it. How often should humans bathe? And I don't have a good answer for you, by the way. All right, so don't look to me for the answer. But they were upset because they thought people should bathe more often, and I'm like, and they were afraid of skin breaking down, which skin can break down when you don't bathe. I agree with that, but I don't honestly know. So I'm not here to promote hygiene or defeat hygiene for you guys. I'm just getting you to think that this sebum that you're producing is not something you just want to scrub away all the time. It really is protective, right? And so I have to say, well, bathe when you feel like you're sticky and gross, right? But don't project that, right? Don't project that you have to bathe every day. I've seen people wash their hair every day and bathe every day. I'm like, what? Where did that come from? I mean, because that's certainly not the most conducive thing, really, for your skin's health. But I don't have a good answer for what it is, because I think that's probably individual. Right? So, yeah, Kale?
Especially like with the temperature of water, it seems to be a really big deal with that too. Because I mean, you can have cold showers and not scrub a lot of times, and you would get a lot of the basic stuff off without destroying the skin as much. But if you had hot water, you would you'd be itchy all the time, dry, all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, so like I said, I don't have one of those. We have a strange sense. I was kind of taken aback when she brought that up, and I felt like asking her, but I really wanted to end the phone conversation because I was tired of talking. I was like, well, how often should people bathe? All right, and I don't know.
I was a med tech at an assisted living and a dementia ward, and I mean it's up to the resident, but we tend to make them bathe twice a week at least.
Mm-hmm. And but I'm gonna say, but was there science? Did they say here's the reason? I mean, because the reason I'm just gonna say the reason that I have seen is because we don't want to spread, parasites, and we have shared materials. But I'm just saying, in light of that, how frequently would you actually carry parasites? I don't know.
And on the assisted living side, I mean, they were twice a week, but in our dementia ward, they were 3 times a week, because when you go to the bathroom and stuff like that on yourself like they do, you tend to carry more bacteria, and it's just, we don't bacteria.
I'm not
So-
against it. I'm just saying, you know, but nobody gives me a really good idea because
Right.
because then there's people that the risk of falling in the shower, right, or being in that water is much greater than the risk of a skin disease. And so there's plenty of people on this planet that do sponge baths, right, or do baths with just wipes. And there's completely waterless shampoos, right, where you can, old people that are stuck immobile. So the question still is to me, because my father was in one place and they bathed him every day, and he hated it. And I'm like, why are you doing that to him, right? You know, and it was with the assistance of other people, but I'm like, why are you doing that? You know, and he didn't stay there very long, but I was just kind of curious. I'm like, okay, are you just looking for something to do? But I mean, trust me, when you go out in the field, all I'm trying to get here is I'm not giving you any answers. I'm just going to say, look for answers yourself. If people can't give you a straight answer, then question authority, all right? It doesn't mean, you got to keep your job, so you got to do what you're told to do. But don't ever accept somebody else's reality. Don't accept my reality. I don't have an answer for you, right? But don't sit there and do something because somebody else said that, well, this is just the way we do it. Because we don't want a society of followers, right? We want a society of leaders. We want a society of people who can think independently, don't we? So this is one of the questions, like I said, is I've been facing, you know, and let's face it, if you're going into healthcare, you're going to deal with older people. They're going to be likely your clientele. So sebum is not, again, it gets overactive when you're a teenager, and then, yeah, it's probably better for you to scrub a little bit more frequently because it does cultivate bacteria. Because even though it prevents some things from growing, it makes other things very happy. All right? So you do have to find that balance, right? Homeostasis. We're back there again, aren't we? All right? So, physiology. Okay, so that's what stuff we have in the skin. So here's again how it works. So I asked you on the Kahoots about the 5 functions, so we just want to remember who's responsible for what, all right? So we're going to prevent water loss, and this is going to be our, right, keratin and our, right, sugary lipids, right, all this stuff that we stick in there. That's going to keep us from losing water. All right, so in other words, you don't, when it gets dry out here in Texas, you're not giving up all this 42 liters of fluid that you have in yourself normally. And also, when you go swimming, you don't walk out like SpongeBob, right? You know, you don't walk out with suddenly you've taken on all this fluid. So it goes both ways. Prevents entry of microbes. So that's the secretions of the skin as well as the structure of these really tight junctions, right? With these anchoring desmosomes, right? Protection from abrasion. Well, I've got lots and lots of layers, and so, gosh, I can lose a few, right, when I get contact and I have friction. And then, of course, the melanin for absorbing energy. It's really good for that, and a few other things. So we'll take a look at each one of those as we go through here. So sensory functions, because students do forget this. I was just grading again, I told you my online class, they do these group questions for grades, right? And so, you know, they can work together, right, and they submit this. And so the first question was, hey, what are the functions of skin? A lot of them are leaving out sensory. This is your main interface with the world. This is how you know what's going on. Okay, so hair follicles with the hairs in them, that has a root plexus. When you see the word plexus, we're talking about nerves. Now, they don't show you it so well here. They show you the nerves connecting up to the erector pili. What it have to do this, right? Because this is muscle, and muscle has to be told what to do. And on these models, like all your models, even the mini men back there, anything that you see in yellow is going to be nervous tissue, right? So lots and lots of nervous tissue. You're going to have to know them, the names of them. Now your lab person, because we don't see Merkel cells on our models, we do see the Pacinian corpuscles, which they also call lamellated because they're layered. They look like onions. And we see Meissner's corpuscles. You don't, again, these aren't made to show you the Merkels, just be aware. So these are put strategically for their stimuli, right? Different cells are going to respond to different things. That's the value of having a lot of different cells. So the Meissner's corpuscles and the Merkel cells, right, they're up here towards the surface. So these sensors are going to give you touch. We say fine discriminative touch. All right? So you know that you're making contact with things because of this. And you know that things are making contact with you right? If you ever thought about why you didn't feel that mosquito land on you and stick its proboscis into your skin, right? It's because it didn't, right, start an action potential with these. It's so light that it didn't actually change the membranes of the cells. Because yes, mosquitoes like to be undetected. It helps to get what they want. Alright? So Pacinian are deeper down. So I say these are pressure and vibration. And you can think P for P. You sure as heck can. You got to use whatever device you can in the beginning. So these are the Pacinians, right? Really low down in here. So they're going to know the force at which you've been touched or grabbed. And they're going to know movement and vibration, right? And then you have a lot and lots of what we call free nerve endings, which they're basically just modified axons. You'll learn this later on when we talk about nervous tissue. And those ones detect pain as a stimuli. They detect temperature, both hot and cold. So you have a lot of sophisticated functions, and you only have these because of your ability to understand the world, right? So that's our sensory. Temperature regulation, as I mentioned about the blood already when we talked about color. Well, yeah, that's the amount of blood moving through as well as sweat. These are the two main ways, and shivering. All right? So again, we remember from your enzyme lab that all this biochemistry in your body likes this nice warm temperature, because that's optimal for molecular movement. So I like to keep that nice warm temperature, right? But it changes out here, doesn't it? All right, so we have to be able to figure out what do we do when it goes up and what do we do when it goes down, because your skin's your interface. So I say peak gains, metabolism, oh, hands down, this is the number one, right? When you do any sort of energy transfer, heat is produced. Exercise, environment, yeah, Texas gets hot. It gets hotter than 98.6. Fever, okay, so those are ways that you would gain heat to your system, your body. Heat loss is usually environment, right? It's usually you're in a cooler area, all right? Okay, so we know the scenario. You've lived this scenario. You probably even know what you've done because of this. So all we're going to do is just formalize it in this chapter and say, yeah, here we go. All right, so response for the just right. And so this is nice. It shows you, okay, blood vessels. This is really, really important. Sweat certainly helps when it's hot, but blood is going to affect us whether it's warm or cold, or hot or cold. All right? So in this scenario, again, here's our papillae, right? Because blood is really, really common. It's coming through this hypodermis, it's branched and moved through this dermis, and it's coming all the way up to the papillae, because we said, yeah, that way we feed all the cells of our stratum vacale. But this blood could be a detriment when it's cold, because again, blood is mostly water. Water absorbs heat, right? High heat capacity. Man, it's just going to radiate out, right? Because heat moves by radiation, evaporation, conduction, right? Convection. So again, that's why when you get up, right, your seat is hot, right? You just radiate it, right? You conduct it, because that's a direct contact. Radiation is a distance we've moved. But regardless, this is a vulnerability, isn't it? So when it's cold out, what I'm going to do is constrict, right? Vasoconstriction. I'm going to make the tubes smaller. So my skin's going to feel cooler because there'll be less blood perfusing. My skin will look lighter because there's less blood perfusing with this hemoglobin. And then when it's warm, well, all I have to do is vasodilate, right? I got to make the tubes bigger, more blood flows to my skin. I feel warmer. My skin, I look a little redder, right? So you get this. That's your autocorrect. And I say here, if it fails, we have, again, hyperthermia, so high temperature, and hypothermia. So this is the way you, right, you are trying to address the change. Remember, because the homeostasis is staying just right. So hyperthermia, again, is high, so above fever, right? And hypo is below. So, you know, it's a little, it's anything below what is a baseline temperature for humans. So we could probably say safely for humans if we fell below 95 and stayed below 95. Let's see. Yeah, Katie?
If our optimum operating temperature is 98.6, then why do we sweat whenever it's 98.6 degrees outside?
Because you're warmer inside. It's not really the environment. So what you're doing is you're probably always, especially if you're active, going to generate a lot of heat, and it's going to stay in there because of all the insulation that we have, the adducts in the hypodermis. It keeps it, right? It's on top of that muscle. And muscle is the greatest. It's our generator of heat, right? It's the furnace, all right? So most likely, right, you're really higher than that. And it just so turns out that normally we don't have to sweat because the difference is so great between the outside and inside that the movement of heat out of the body is adequate to regulate it. But when it starts to get warmer out there, that blood can't on its own, right, manage all of that heat because the heat's only going to move till it's equal. And just like molecules moving into fusion, heat's only going to move until it's spread out. So if it's warmer out here, then I don't have as much of an opportunity to move as much heat. And so sweat helps me because sweat can absorb a lot. Water can take on a whole lot more heat, and that's what it's doing. And then if it comes out to your surface, right, it's now out here. If it's dry, the water can evaporate. Of course, if it's humid like it's been the last couple of days, then it's harder, right? It's harder to heat regulate. So that's why we talk about, what's the environment the person's in. All right, vitamin D synthesis, yeah, this is a big part of our skin. And we said this is a trade-off. Melanin protects you from UV radiation, but if your melanin's picking up the UV radiation, then you're not giving as much of that energy to this process. So darker skinned people are less likely to get cancers and less likely to damage their skin from that energy, but they have a harder time meeting their vitamin D needs. So we do have to consider that. So there's the steroid, which just means it's a chemical based on cholesterol, right? So the technical, or the term for that is cholecalciferol, right? So this steroid becomes this when there's enough sunlight, all right? This cholecalciferol, right, diffuses into the blood and is taken to the liver. The liver makes it into calcidiol, and the kidneys make this into calcitriol, right? And that form is what I can use to absorb calcium. So this vitamin D, getting to this form, makes me better at absorbing calcium. Okay, so, and we use calcium for a lot of things, but it's used predominantly for, right, neuromuscular function. So I've got to have a certain level of calcium in my blood. And I'm optimizing that calcium with vitamin D. But I'm telling you that starts with your skin. Okay, that's what I'm saying here. I don't perceive asking you a question about these, right, specific 3 chemicals. I'm going to be honest with you. Tell me the order of the conversion of calcium. I want you to understand that UV radiation is necessary to produce, or to help produce, active vitamin D. And once I have active vitamin D, I'm better at getting calcium. Now, vitamin D probably does a number of other things. We're still really in the stages of testing it more. We kind of wrote the vitamin off a while back and said, no, this is something we need for calcium absorption. But a lot of different investigators are revisiting that, and so the results of that actually are we have increased the RDA, or the recommended daily amount of vitamin D that we tell people to take in. It has gone up a little bit. And we do know now that people who have darker skin, we definitely, they are more at risk for a deficiency, and so we really, especially in the winter months, want them to be aware of that.
So if you're outside a lot, you shouldn't have to take vitamin D?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct.
So to be like,
yeah. So, diseases, disorders, and injury, right? This is the cool thing again. In the integument, you can see this stuff. And you can't see other forms of cancer. That's why, again, skin cancer is unfortunately very common, but it's also very easy to cure, to treat and cure, because you can see it. So I say to my students, really what I want you to do is understand, what are the what are the reasons for the problem? And that's really where we begin. Because clearly, if you're going to treat the problem, you've got to know what caused it. Right? So that's all I discriminate on this part and say, okay, look, you should know if it's a bacterial infection, a fungi, right, burn, a cancer, is it genetic? I do include cirrhosis as a genetic, and there's other genetic ones, but again, this is it's an introduction chapter. All right, so diseases, disorders, injury. Any injury results in inflammation. So inflammation is your body's response to an injury. Okay? So whether that injury is a burn, like we mentioned, we were talking about last time, or it's a cut, or even an invasion, if a cell has been hurt or killed in the process, you have started inflammation. The four cardinal signs we mentioned about was that it's redness, heat, swelling, and pain. So whenever inflammation is going on, we're going to see those four things. What will change is how much of those, right? So if you do cut yourself deeper or damage more tissue, you clearly get more redness, more swelling. But it's going to be those four things.
Redness, heat, swelling, and pain.
And the reason for this is just clear and simple. As we said, you injured a cell, so because you injured the tissues are made of cells, and injured cells are little bags of chemicals, right? You got all this chemistry going on inside the cell. Well, as soon as you cut it open, it's leaking all this out, and those chemicals are what initiate inflammation. They start it. Okay, so diseases again. That's our overview. We're gonna cover these in the next couple slides. Skin cancer, all right? So we did go and talk about, in chapter 3 about this idea of what cancer was and about the proto-oncogenes and the tumor suppressor genes. There's a high incidence of skin cancer. That's what I'm saying here. I'm not going to ask you that on a test, but we do have problems because our atmosphere we've lost some of our protective. Ozone actually helps to filter out some of the short wavelengths, and shorter wavelengths have higher energy, and the more energy means more damage, right? We can also get this through contact with chemicals, though, and other radiation, other forms of radiation. We said melanin is very good at protecting, right? But you end up skin cancer as a result of damage over years. That's why I said the number one predictor of cancer is age, right? DNA has been damaged through the years, and it's repaired, and it's made changes. DNA mutations accumulate. It's made changes. So our risk factors, well, how much melanin you have. So less melanin, more risk, right? Lighter skinned people clearly have to be more careful about UV radiation. All right, less melanin, more risk. Amount of exposure, right? So your occupation, if you're working outdoors, right? Construction, road work, farmers, you're going to have a higher incidence of cancer, skin cancer. And as I already said, age, because cancer is really just accumulation of changes in your DNA over time. Okay? Some happen sooner than others, but that's what it is. All right, so your chapter looks at, right, the different types. They're not pleasant to look at, but you see them. All right. So there's a basal cell carcinoma and a squamous cell carcinoma. I won't ask you to describe what they look like here. I will ask you to know that they do come from different cells having the mutation. So when I say basal cell, well, that's going to be the cells in the stratum of the cell, right? It's in the name, all right? So this is really there. That means that's the cells that are actually have undergone the mutation. And again, you see them in areas where you tend to have more sunlight, the parts of your body that are exposed. The squamous cell carcinoma, well, these are going to be those keratinocytes really in the spinosum and the granulosum, especially the spinosum, because they say, those are ones that are still living. In the granulosum, they're starting to die, so they wouldn't matter. Right? They don't normally divide, and then they start dividing, right? Because we said that cancer is cells that have their out of control cell cycle. the squamous cell are more likely to metastasize, so there's a difference in, again, they're pretty straightforward though. You get them removed, or you treat them with energy, and to kill them. You want to kill these abnormal cells, right? And the nice thing is, again, you can see the progression often with these, so removal is a very straightforward way to take care of the problem, and then monitor. The cutaneous melanomas, these are they're not as common, but they are a big problem. They tend to have a higher genetic element to them. In other words, it's more likely if you had a parent that had it, that you will inherit it. Right? And that's why we say watch. If you suddenly have a spot that shows up, that may have just been, as Katie was asking, we were talking about freckles and things last time, that may be just totally fine. It may just that area of the skin, genes got turned on, you got more melanin, and it's fine. It's not going to continue.
It's
right?
normally in like moles and stuff, and then it's usually.
Yeah, where you've got a bunch of these cells together, and you have to watch it. So if you have a dark spot that appears and begins to spread or change colors, because often they call them variegated, right? So they have different colors in the same thing. It's not a uniform color to it. That's also a problem, okay? But very, very, a lot of pigment there. Those melanocytes aren't supposed to divide. So again, we have a problem with a cell that wasn't supposed to be dividing, suddenly starts dividing, right? And it's very likely. So this just goes through the clinical. I'm not going to ask you about that A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's just, it's cool to know that. That's, again, something you use clinically for determining. So.
I had two mulch removed because they were starting to get discolored and they kept growing.
Yeah, and that's a concern. Yeah, you want to definitely want to have them removed at the moment.
There's nothing wrong with them though.
Yay. So skin disorders again, so there's your cancers and diseases. So the skin disorders again, they are easy to observe, which is also a problem because then people see them and are aware of them. But that's a good thing at the end of the day. It's embarrassing for some people, but it's really good to have some idea about what's going on in your body. So we put in there things like eczema, acne, seborrheic dermatitis, psoriasis, cold sores, impetigo, scabies, hives, warts. I mean, there's all kinds of lovely things that show up in our skin, right? And I say, anything that I cover in this, I want you to know the cause. That's all I'm telling you. So you don't have to know the specific organism. You just need to know that that's a bacterial origin or a viral origin or genetic. Yeah, Katie?
I thought that scabies was like little bugs eating
They are.
skin.
So they're parasites. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's what they cause then in the skin. So you have an infection, you're infestation. I'm not going to talk about scabies though specifically, right? I'm just going to talk about a few of these, right? That's just an example of different things that affect your skin. So eczema and dermatitis, these are really kind of catch-all. It basically is overall, that means there's an inflammation of the dermis, and they are often caused from a variety of things. And many of them could be allergies. Many of them could be something that your body is defending you against something that's not really a threat. That's what an allergy is, right? Some of them result from infections. So again, microorganisms. Poor circulation. This really usually complicates it. Exposure to chemicals can cause this inflammation. Some people are temperature sensitive, and this leads to it. So exposure to sunlight. Because again, these are all factors that can change genetic expression or activate other cells that are trying to protect you in the skin. So, right, dry, itchy patches, swelling, flaky, they can bleed. We often treat them with immunosuppressants because again, we're trying to keep your body from, especially if it's an allergy, from responding to this. They're responding again to a threat that's not really a threat. Okay? If we're treating with that, that's why we're doing that. Right? So this would not, by the way, make a good test question, would it? Because there are a lot of causes here that I just gave you for this. So I'm just telling you, I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to make a good test question. But that's what it comes down to. Yeah, Kale?
One of my docs here, I always told people whenever they have a rash, they're like, is it wet or is it a dry rash? And he's like, and the way it works for is how many
it's more unsightly than it is threatening.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. But it only becomes threatening again if you have open infections on a long term, and that leads to opportunity for true problems. But yeah, good thought. Bacterial infection. So here's 4, and only 4 I'm going to bring up. Right, scarlet fever, decubitus ulcers, or bed sores, impetigo, and acne. Again, you don't have to know the specific organism. I don't always even give you the specific organism. But this is a streptococcus, this is a staphylococcus, but that's a different Corpinio-bacterium. But you don't have to, again, know that. And that's also a staphylococcus. So staphylococcus is very common in our integument. We coexist with it. We have a relationship. We don't particularly like it, all right, but it's not going away. So your best bet is to try to keep your skin intact, to keep it out, right? So I just want you again to know that acne, impetigo, and decubitus ulcers and scarlet fever are bacterial in origin. So when we treat them, we have to consider antibiotics. It has to be on the list of how do we deal with this. All right. So, and they are, unfortunately, like I said, impetigo, very common. Acne, decubitus ulcers are generally, again, also called pressure sores because they end up being exacerbated by decreased circulation. And decreased circulation is a problem because it means that you don't have as many defensive cells reaching the area. And with less blood, you're killing your own healthy cells too. They're getting starved for oxygen and nutrients. All right, viral infections, rubiola, chickenpox, cold sores really are the examples here. All right, so we do vaccinate more commonly against viral infections. Viruses like bacteria, these are very common among us. And we are, again, trying to reach a balance with them because they're going to be there. As long as your immune system stays healthy, you will likely fight it off. But in younger and older people, the immune system isn't as functional, and so we do assist the immune system by vaccination. Right? Virus, the likely route of entry is almost always respiratory, not exclusively. There are clearly intestinal viruses we hear about, like the norovirus, but again, that doesn't end up showing up on the skin. These end up, you see the rashes on the skin, All right. Discoloration. So these are underlying problems. So again, you'd see it through the integument, you could diagnose it from the integument, but it's not really a problem with the integument. That's what we're saying. Okay. So cyanosis, that's that bluish coloration that you often see around the lips and the nail beds where it's a little bit, there's going to be less melanin. And that's generally either your circulation is kind of low to that area, or you don't have enough oxygen getting acquired. So if you have a respiratory disorder, you might present with cyanosis, right? And we want to deal with that. And then jaundice, of course, is liver damage, right? This is a build-up of the bilirubin. Bilirubin is a chemical that your liver, right, forms from your blood cells when it breaks down your blood cells.
A lot of babies get jaundice.
Because their livers, when they're born, are not functioning to the point they need to be, right? Because they didn't have to. Mom was, right, doing all the digestion, all the oxygenation, and all the removal of all waste.
Okay.
Baby didn't have to do that. And then when they're born, the likeliness is their liver is not to the point that it needs to be to clear all that bilirubin, because they'll be breaking down blood cells right away. And so if it's a very serious, right, the liver is just really behind in its functioning, you simply, right, expose them to UV radiation because that breaks down bilirubin that's in the blood moving to the skin, right? But most kids are just, frankly, their liver will start functioning very, very quickly and it won't be a problem. But yeah, but and then in other people, again, if they have liver problems from hepatitis infections or cirrhosis or something else, jaundice is very likely to show up again. All right. So fungus, the only one I have for you is ringworm, right? And I don't really have that for you. All right, I just couldn't tell you about that. All right. So ringworm is actually a fungus. So again, you can't treat that with an antibiotic. You can't treat that with an antiviral. We'd have to use an antifungal. And we coexist with a lot of fungus in our skin too as well. It's very, very common. We collectively usually call these yeasts, but there are other, right, fungi that also are just part of our existence. Okay? And your skin is generally very good at keeping them from populating too much. Because you only get sick when they start to, right, multiply and produce more and more of themselves and start eating and producing toxins. All right, genetics, I just have for you psoriasis. There are other things, but again, we want to just kind of introduce this idea that the skin is a way to tell about a person's health. So psoriasis is a genetic, you pass this on, it's a defect in the production of keratin. It's just that the code is a little bit off. And so there's this abnormal keratin that's a little bit heavier. The skin just tends to scale, right? The production of papillae, right, those dermal papillae is a little different as well. And so you tend to get this again, different keratin, bigger, longer papillae or more extensive papillae. It's usually, right, skin starts to shed or fall off, kind of scaly. And it often produces bleeding because as it removes those dermal papillae, which are projecting into the epidermis where all the blood is going to result in that. And that begins to be the problem right there when you're exposing the skin to all that bacteria and viruses and fungi that you coexist with. Injuries, yay, we're getting to the very end, right? Injuries. We all have gone through these. This is a pretty quick cartoon to say, here's what we have, right? Here's a nice and kind of deep puncture wound. We've gone through the epidermis and dermis. We're not down into the hypodermis, but and here's a process of what we're going to follow with. And I said, so inflammation is going to occur because you've damaged cells and you've damaged blood vessels. So clotting will occur too, but that's a separate process, right? So for the blood vessels that aren't affected, all these injured cells which have released their chemicals in this area, well, those chemicals are going to cause your blood vessels to dilate, so they become bigger, which means there's more blood flow to the area. And not blood flow so you can bleed, because that blood flow is not going to the injured blood vessel. It's more blood flow so you can deliver more white cells, more defenders, right? The blood vessels, the arterioles and the capillaries become a little leakier. They become a little more what we call permeable. So that allows these white cells, which are pretty big, to leave the blood and go out into the tissue where the injury is. So that's why you see that redness, heat, and swelling. The pain comes about because with all this swelling going on, you're going to put pressure on your nerves. You can feel it. Okay? So, again, the idea is get a lot of blood flow here to bring in a lot of defenders. And more blood also means more nutrients, so the cells can undergo mitosis and fix all the injured area, replace themselves. All right? And we said again, remember the epidermis doesn't have blood vessels, because that means that if I have to make it through here to actually start inflammation, I have to make it through the epidermis to actually be a problem. So if you're bleeding, you've involved your dermis, and if you're bleeding, you're going to experience inflammation. Okay? So they just show you again the fibroblasts coming in here to produce more collagen to help repair the connective tissue. If it's not extensive, these epithelial cells, they'll start dividing, they'll increase their division, they'll move underneath it and around it, all right, to then heal from the inside out. Okay, so that's really the idea. The macrophages are there. We mentioned about them being very prominent in connective tissue, so they can eat any bacteria that came in, and they can, right, help clean up the dead cells. That's their job. And then, you end up with a scab over time. If the damage was not very extensive, you probably won't scar. We said scarring is only going to occur if you've done so much damage that these epidermal cells can't keep up with that.
So a blister is just on the epidermis, it's not.
Yeah, well, what you have is you're having fluid accumulation from all the lymph tissue underneath there and the permeable blood vessels in this place. But yeah, you have a little capsule around it. Okay, so a blister often means I haven't really injured these upper ones, but I've done some sort of trauma or friction to the cells underneath. Yeah. All right. So burns again. pretty straightforward. You know, if you any high energy exposure, you run the risk of dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, right? So you're not keeping the sodiums, the chlorides, the bicarbonates, all these ions and these chemicals you need in your body because they've been lost. You've exposed yourself, right, by losing this cap here, this boundary. We treat with a lot of nutrients to replace water and electrolytes. We also put proteins in there to help rebuild. And the big deal is trying to minimize infection. We talked a little bit about these last time. I'm not going to ask you a question about the rules of 9, but it's always brought up and it is important clinically. It's very important clinically, all right? So you look at this idea of where the burn and they estimate how much loss occurred to the skin, the integument, all right? And that's really your surface area. And so your replacement or treatment of that is based on what we call this rules of 9. So either a multiple of 9 or a divisor of 9, right? That's why it gets called the rules of 9, right? Depending on where the damage, but you've got to kind of match this to try to help the person recover. All right. The classification, I do ask you a test question on this or a quiz question on this to say, which of the following, and this is what it says, involves the epidermis and dermis. And you can clearly see that would be the deep partial and the full thickness, and of course the 4th degree would as well. So this is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th degree. That's just two terms for these 3. They just call the 4th degree the 4th degree, right? So if you had that superficial partial thickness, that's often like you took something hot and you pulled your hand away and it's red. You sat out in the sun just a little too long, right? And you're a little bit red, right? Maybe a little bit of swelling, but maybe not, right? And it's going to heal pretty quickly. You have damaged cells, but again, there's not many that have been involved. Your deep partial, or what we call a 2nd degree, you have gone into the dermis, and this is the kind of thing they're trying to show you in the back of this. You have gone down into the dermis. This is going to take longer because you have damaged more, clearly. You've exposed yourself to more energy, more problems. All right? So you often do blister with that one. Your 3rd degree or full thickness is we've gone through the dermis, and these have generally you have to do skin grafts here if it's not just a really small area. All right? Because you have again taken in losing the dermis, you lost all those right epithelial cells from the hair follicles and glands that are going to help you regrow skin. And then the 4th degree have actually gone into the muscle, maybe down to the bone. So it's really nasty and really intense energy. Right? These are survival declines dramatically in these 2 groups. Right? So it's a problem again because, like you said, with that exposure, you're prone to infection. You're prone to dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and those can all kill you. So I just say you got to repair this most often with skin grafting. It's going to keep us from wound contracture that we talked about last time. You can do a self graft, so if you can take it from the same person's body and use that tissue if, again, they are not burned extensively, all right? That's clearly not going to work if you have burns over a lot of your body. You can't do an autograft. You have to do another person's allografts. All right? And I just mentioned that, yeah, it works very straightforward. You're transplanting healthy cells into this area, and they're going to grow. Tissue rejection is generally very low in this circumstance too. So, and what you're doing is you're trying to populate the damaged area with healthy new cells. Okay? But skin grafting is often going to be the necessary in these full thickness burns. Okay, but again, they're just separated on the basis of what's involved. All right, there we go. What do you know, man? I tell you. So let's take a look at a few more questions. I hope I wrote good ones. All right, so Oh, she does a great job too singing.
You ever think about what you're really made of? You ever wonder where your hair really grows from? And what about all the nails on your toes? Underneath the cuticles, where do they go? You ever wonder why you can
So,
feel the cold breeze?
I'm not here to torture you guys, but I truly find it amazing that people can take, you know, these very complicated concepts and set them to lyrics and music. I think that's a wonderful tribute. And while you're not going to have to do that for me, maybe someday I'll build that into my class. So, check out the songs because they're cool and they help you remember. I grew up on Schoolhouse Rock, so there's still things I remember because of that. Yep. So, 8 questions. Take all the opportunities you can to learn whatever way suits you. So, which structures help regulate temperature? And so, American should be eccrine as well. All right. Okay. So. This should say eccrine, because that really is a better term. American is a dated term. But it's not sebaceous glands, because those are, again, that's sweat, that helps you with water loss. Nail beds, no. So it really should be your eccrine sweat glands, okay? So, my bad on that one. I'll have to, like I said, when I pull data, throw that one out. What structure helps? Who's really good at this? Losing water or drying out? Yes, yeah. Let me turn that sound down over there. That's really intense. All right. So yes, absolutely. Those sebaceous glands, that fatty substance they make is very good. All right. What is not associated with hair? What's the following is not something about hair? Kind of a test of vocabulary, which means it's not really a hair thing. All right, so again, we said most of the time this one is, right? Most of the time the apocrine are going to be found in those axillary areas and the groin area associated with the hair, all right? Sebaceous glands, hands down, are with hair, all right? They secrete onto the surface of the hair. It's taken out to the surface of the skin on this hair. And that's, again, remember that in lab as well when you're looking at these things, all right? Keratin is part of the hardness of hair and nails and skin, so it's throughout all the integument. So the dermal papillae themselves are not, right? They're standalone. They're not related to a hair or specifically a part of hair, right? They're just there. So that's kind of the idea. It's more of a vocabulary. What would be appropriate to a decrease in temperature? It's got cold out. What do you think you would do if it was cold out? What are you going to do to deal with that cold? Yep, all right. Because, again, the blood flow to the skin is going to deliver more heat. You're going to lose it that way. So the constriction means less delivery of blood, less loss of heat. All right. All right. What type of burn involves only the epidermis? Only the epidermis. Yay! Some have got to be easy, right? Yes. Which of the following is a result of a viral infection? What could be a virus? Virus. Yeah, that's measles right there. Okay, rubella. Let me talk here. All right. So So again, just to give you a taste of the kinds of questions I would ask on a test. Which type of cancer is the rarest and most likely to metastasize? Did not let you? Okay, it's okay. It's all right. Send me a note about that, Ashley. Don't worry. All right. Okay. So just send me an email saying you're not gonna let me. Okay. Don't freak out. So yeah, it's the melanomas. Right. I just cutaneous is versus of the skin. So melanoma. All right. Last question. Which of the following would increase a person's risk for skin cancer? Make them more likely to have skin cancer. Yes, older. You get older and it all just makes it more likely. Excellent. All right. That concludes skin. You guys are going into lab today to cover this, so good luck.